Hey everyone, and welcome to a special DF Direct where we're going to be taking a look at the recent press demo for Forza Horizon 5. It was essentially the first hour of the game available for press to preview, and well, I've taken a look at it and I'm basically blown away by it, and I've shared that experience, or rather I've shared the playable code with my friends and colleagues, John Linneman.
Rich, yes, I talked about this in the Direct, but there's a lot more to say.
And Alex Battaglia.
Yeah, I heard there's ray tracing here. I had to check it out myself. Sadly, no PC code preview, but I'm still happy with the console build. It's all right.
Oh, I know, Alex. I'm sorry.
Okay.
No PC.
Well, let's talk about, I don't know, let's talk about the first impressions that you get here, because what you do get to begin with is the initial drive, which has always been like a sampler of sorts, like a taster's menu of what you should expect from the new Forza Horizon. This time around, pretty phenomenal. John, do you want to go first here?
Yeah, so I did mention this on the Direct, but I think not everybody has seen that. But the idea here is, you know, they start by showcasing various biomes, if you will, throughout the game world that you'll encounter during normal play. In this case, you have like a volcano, there's a jungle, there's a desert. But the way they do it is that they have this wonderful ramp up where they sort of, they always introduce the player to the world in such a cinematic way. These four races are sort of stitched together with little interstitial cutscenes. And it basically has you swapping between vehicles and transitioning seamlessly between the different environments, and the way they set it up, the combination of the music, the camera work, and the environments themselves is just, it's really impressive. And it's something that they've always done really well. It's like the art of the introduction. And it's one of the best I think we've seen yet, because the environments that they're showcasing here, I think, are just exceptionally beautiful. Starting right away with the volcano, which has sort of a height and sense of scale that we've never really seen before in the series. You have this immensity as you come barreling down the side of the volcano before eventually it like ramps off and you're going to the next set. And I think that stuff makes a tremendous first impression. And it really gets you jazzed to keep playing the game, because fundamentally the game looks great, and there's a lot of improvements here, huh? Yeah,
the density side of things, you get that hit immediately with the volcano, just the sheer amount of rocks and debris that are sort of flying past you. And it's it's just packed, right? And I'm still kind of curious as to how they're going to make this work on Xbox One, because it's just so rich. And then you do have the hit from that kind of vista shot, just the sense of scale that you get there. Couple of the jumps that you do in that section, also they kind of pitch the camera to basically show you this full-on environment that's just packed full of detail. This is really impressive stuff, and yeah, I'm kind of blown away by it.
Plus that sandstorm part, I love that when you drive into there's a huge wall of the sandstorm looming down on you and you drive straight into it. It's beautiful.
Yeah. So volumetrics have clearly been ramped up on that. I mean, we saw that in the initial reveal where we had the volumetrics in the jungle. I think what's quite interesting there is that, I mean, this is a pretty standard technique now, the kind of voxelized fog. But in a lot of cases, you kind of get that blocky artifact feel to it, and it seems to be much reduced here.
Yeah.
Whether that's just down to brute force on Series X and things will change on the other platforms, I guess it remains to be seen. But we'll talk about the other platforms in a moment, because we have had the chance to access Series S as well. Mm-hmm. But Alex, your thoughts on this initial drive-by, as it were?
I did actually restart the game because it started off in quality mode, and I really love 60 FPS, so I wanted to try that out, so I restarted it and played it in the 60 FPS mode. And the first thing I noticed, like in the drop, that was really awesome, that I think the previous Forza Horizon games have not done as well as this, is it's not volumetrics, but they're shading their particles a lot better this time around. There's two things, like in the caldera of the volcano itself, there's a massive like steam or smoke cloud or something like that. It's being bisected by a shadow. You don't see like the shadow map artifacts running through it or something like that. It just looks like really well shadowed particles. And I always notice those things because it just looks good. And it makes them look even more 3D than they would otherwise look. And I don't think that's been done really well in previous Horizon games. And another thing I noticed as a part of that too is most of the caldera itself is actually out of the light of the sun until you bank around the corner and jump off, and you get that like really beautiful blue of the sky blending in, and you can also see that on the particles as well. And it seems like their GI system this time around is just so much better. I have no idea why or what's going to be happening. That's something we'll probably find out a bit more when we have the full package in our hands there and get some more information. But those are the two things that I immediately noticed, and then it carries out through the rest of the demo. Like the jungle environment was probably my favorite because I just kept thinking about how I would love to stop the car, get out, you know, just walk around. I mean, that's not exactly what you do in the game. The jungle environment is so stupidly dense, and you're driving through it at like, you know, like 200 kph. It's like crazy. So those are the things I noticed immediately. It was just the improvements to the general shading model in the game, as well as the density, really well shown off in that really awesome looking jungle environment.
Yeah, the indirect lighting from the sky is especially nice on snow. Shadowed regions in the snow are a beautiful place to showcase this, I think, and it looks really, really good there. But then just at the bottom of the volcano, before you get to that next area, it's just the terrain density, I think, that we've mentioned before, where in prior Forza games, you always get the feeling that you were looking at sort of this generated terrain model, which is not a bad thing, and I'm sure that's still underlying here, but it didn't have this like granularity that you would expect. But I feel like this one finally fully ramps that up in a way that makes it look much more like rocky terrain rather than just sort of like a undulating surface. It feels a lot more natural. And the thing about that though is I'll be very curious to see how well this sort of stuff scales on the last gen machines, particularly on, like, say, Xbox One, the original, right? Because obviously I assume that they've put a lot of attention into that version as well. So we'll find out soon enough.
Yeah, that's the big mystery, right? How is all of this going to scale down to Xbox One? And to be fair, I mean, that was a question we raised pretty much sort of during E3 time. And we did actually get a response from Mike Brown, the creative director, who was basically saying, invested in a number of scalable technologies, dynamic resolution scaling, interesting, variable draw distances, and robust levels of detail system, which is kind of, well, in a sense, there's new stuff there, because I don't think we've seen DRS in a Forza game before. I might be wrong on that.
I don't think so.
No, I don't think so.
But we have seen stuff like, well, scalable technologies, as Mike Brown says there, but in terms of shifting settings on the fly and keeping that pristine resolution, but basically scaling back other elements of the scene, which I found quite fascinating back in the day.
And this is something I believe that Forza Horizon has done on the PC, right, Alex?
Yeah.
If I recall, like, they had the dynamic detail settings, I think.
Yeah, it's like dynamic, ultra dynamic, you know. I think it was also in the Forza Motorsport 7 as well there too. I might have seen this happening when I was playing through the demo in the 60 FPS mode, like when you're going down that caldera side. I did notice, since you're driving this truck that has like a large back window that's dark, and it has like the local environmental queue map that updates in real time on it. I think I did notice it shift in resolution as I was just about to bend around the corner, but I'm not sure if that was just something else. But, you know, we've seen it before in other games in the past, and it's pretty curious.
Did you just call the 2021 Ford Bronco just like that truck?
I don't even know the names of cars, John. What do you think I am?
Alex is on another level. He's beyond personal
I'm beyond
transportation.
I levitate, I meta transport myself. You know how it is.
Oh dear. You've pointed out some of the differences there between quality and performance mode. And I think we should actually focus on that a bit, because using that intro drive, we can actually match up quality and performance modes on Series X, and a bit later on we can do that with Series S. So obviously we have on the quality mode 30 frames per second, performance mode 60 frames per second, but I don't know if this is a first, but we've got a console game here with quality and performance modes that are both targeting native 4K, right? Which is pretty immense. But at the same time, there are some pretty fundamental differences between them, but the differences seem to scale according to the complexity of the environment in terms of what Playground there called scalable technologies. But first of all, I think we kind of need to talk about the 30 FPS mode, because I don't really know what to say here except to say that it's absolutely stunning, and the fluidity that they're getting from 30 FPS, they seem to have cracked it. John, what do you reckon?
Well, first of all, I do think Forza Horizon has always done pretty well at 30 FPS.
Sure, yeah.
But a lot of the secret comes down to the motion blur quality. And one of the big changes they seem to have made here, at least, is that they're using the longer motion blur shutter speed option, which was something you could enable on PC, but I believe the prior games did not use this.
Yeah.
And I actually think that's a huge deal. Just by turning that on, it sort of blurs together the frames in a way that makes it look more coherent as it scrolls by at a high speed, just leading to a smoother looking experience all around. The way they dial in their very specific FOV and camera placements, I think, combined with that, it really works well in a way that looks great. And beyond all of this, though, I mean, something Forza's always sort of pushed is like the controller latency, keeping the controller latency as low as possible. Even going back to like Forza 1, they were like updating the controller polling at a higher rate than the actual renderer, right? Mm-hmm. So I feel like this is just sort of like the end point of their goal to get a smooth, playable 30 FPS experience working in a racing game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does feel like they've cracked it. I hesitate to use the word, but with the motion blur, it just feels somewhat filmic. It really does deliver. And it is firmly juxtaposed against a performance mode that does look more game-like, if you like. Mm-hmm. The kind of really heavy post-process seems to have been peeled back a touch, and you get a more sort of gamic.
I like this. We have filmic and gamic. I think that works.
Filmic and gamic.
Gamic. So one thing I did notice there between the two modes, John did notice that the shutter speed is longer this time around. It seems like for both modes as well too, which is really nice. In the Ultra mode, or I'm calling it the Ultra mode, the 30 FPS mode, on the previous Forza Horizon games, there was a motion blur quality setting that controlled the amount of samples used there. And the 30 FPS mode seems to be using the highest quality actually this time around. And that leads to it looking extremely pristine. And that's not there in the 60 FPS mode. It's using at least one or two notches down. Obviously, I'll have to check out the PC version to figure out which one. So that leads to a little bit more of a video game look when the motion blur hits the screen, because you can actually technically see the samples, unlike the filmic look, you know?
A little bit of grain and like gaps in there.
Yep.
Just a touch. Yeah, that's right.
So I'm going to go back to the scalable technologies thing, robust levels of LOD, level of detail, because I don't really see any level of detail transitions in the quality mode. It's so consistent, and you can sort of trace elements of the environment way back into the distance where they're fully formed. Same deal when it reaches the camera, but then when you repeat the experience on the performance mode, it's a lot more game-like. I think the jungle in particular, the LOD transitions, the pop-in is a lot more evident there.
There's like a very specific distance where you see the tree lods swap between one step before the highest quality and then the highest quality LOD, and once you notice it, it's almost like there's an invisible line in front of the car where you just see them kind of snap from one to the other.
Yeah.
That's kind of the only nitpick I would say with those kind of LOD transitions, and it is more noticeable in the performance mode.
And it's pretty obviously the case that actual environmental density is pared back. But I think what's quite interesting is the initial volcano scene still looks really packed, right?
It does, yeah.
It still looks really dense, but when you start taking a closer look, you can see that sort of environmental debris is scaled back quite significantly. Yeah, I think overall it's a really interesting choice that gamers have got here, because obviously I think the 60 frames per second mode feels better to play because you've got lower input latency, but the fact is that the 30 FPS mode just looks so phenomenal, so consistent, that it's actually going to be a really interesting choice to see what gamers choose between those two modes.
One of the bugbears we've had with Horizon games is that to change graphical settings, you have to restart the game.
Yeah.
And I actually think this has a weird beneficial effect in terms of making the 30 FPS mode seem more acceptable. Because if you play, like, say, Control, like Ultimate Edition, right, you can swap between 30 and 60 at any time by enabling the ray tracing. And when you switch to 30, it's very jarring, I think. But you get used to it. I think in this case, if you could switch it instantly, I think it would actually feel a lot worse. And when you see it side by side, you kind of feel it as well. But by making the player restart the entire game each time, it gives enough of a space between the two modes that you don't get that contrast. And it just ends up feeling kind of fine, right? It's a weird side effect.
I see what you're saying there, because yes, in the press demo we had, it was on two fronts really. First of all, restarting the game is required to switch between the two modes, and secondly, also there's no save positions in the press demo. You actually have to restart the entire game from scratch. So yeah, it is a sort of big reset button there. Other than that though, the parity between the two modes is quite remarkable, I thought. I thought they did a really impressive job there. It sort of speaks to the scalability of the systems in there. And I am wondering to what extent there's actually a lot more happening on the quality mode that we're not seeing, because essentially you're traveling at, 200 kph minimum for most of the time. So I think photo mode in the final game is going to be something that we're going to have to investigate, because I suspect there's a lot of, we've actually seen it in the initial E3 demos and whatnot, where they did linger on the detail a little more. And it just does look absolutely phenomenal. Let's talk about Xbox Series S, which I don't think you guys sampled, right?
Nope.
I haven't seen it, no.
Okay. Well, the key difference is that it's native 4K on Series X, as you would hope. Native 1080p on Series S, so no pretensions that it's going to be targeting 1440p or whatever, straight down to 1080p, which I think pays off, because when you look at the game, well, first of all, it's 1080p with 4x MSAA.
That's pretty good.
Which is pretty decent for image quality, and obviously Series X 4x MSAA at 4K as well, so it's pretty awesome image quality wise all around, which is kind of like a signature of the Forza series, really. Those pristine edges, it's all about that.
The thing about that though is I think MSAA is really good for rendering cars and like building geometry, but when you start to have a lot of foliage around, they've done a decent job sort of smoothing it out in its own ways. I remember in Forza Horizon 4, even at native 4K, you could really feel the lack of any sort of like temporal component in the anti-aliasing that led to noticeable shimmering on transparent edges. So it looked very, very clean in some ways, but not quite as clean as I would have liked in others. And I haven't played enough Forza Horizon 5 to really analyze what they've done yet with that stuff, but that is the one weird caveat to using MSAA, I think.
Yeah, it became more noticeable in the jungle environment, particularly in the 60 FPS mode. I noticed it pretty well. Also in the initial drop, when you can control the car dropping into the horizon, you can actually see shader aliasing on the hood of the car. And that's the one thing I noticed, that like in the moment I was like, I'm watching a rendering and not like a really, as the MSA can't do anything about that really. So that was one thing I thought about. Yeah.
Going back to Series S, it really is a mirror image of Series X. Obviously, when we break out photo mode and take a closer look, we might see some differences, but the density is there. The sheer consistency and level of detail that we saw on Series X also seems to be there. And it looks like similar trades to Series X have been made in the 60 FPS mode. So yes, Series S does have 60 FPS mode, and it's still targeting 1080p with 4x MSAA. But yes, Playground Games themselves have said that they have invested in dynamic resolution scaling. It's very difficult to pick that out. I think you picked out an example on Series X there, Alex, but it's actually really difficult to get away from the fact that it does seem to be mostly running at native resolution here, which I think is great. So where do we go from here? I guess we need to talk about ray tracing, right? Because it's quite selective, but it's quite interesting, right, Alex?
I don't know what the heck Forza Vista is. I keep, they keep saying it, and I just don't remember what what it is every single time, but I know in the game's garage you can walk around the cars, and you can walk around cars you don't even own, and that's a really nice thing. You can see immediately that in the performance mode that the reflections on the body of the car here, I purposely chose this one with a lot of convex and concave areas, with like what do you call those things? A spoiler? Just what is the thing? The thing on the back of the car that looks like a fin. I don't know what that is. I don't know anything about cars.
This is evident, Alex.
Whatever that thing is called, the thing that makes it faster, you can see that there's a difference in reflections there. And but for most of the scene, you should see actually the reflections look pretty the same. That's because, as far as I can tell, like if you stop here, looking at the back of this car, and you can see this kind of chromed piece of metal that's round and tubular. You can see that. You can tubular, dude. You can see the reflection of the car's body itself in it, but everything outside the reflection of the car's body actually looks the same between the two versions in terms of the reflection. So it seems to me the only thing that's being ray traced against in this BV8 structure, apparently, is the car itself. And now this actually makes quite a bit of sense, because self-reflections are one of the most important parts of ray tracing, and that it does really well. And in this game, it already has a rather competent system of real-time dynamic cube maps for the rest of the scene. So it works out pretty well in the end here in this 30 FPS mode, at least in this Forza Vista garage mode. It helps the material quality by far, I would say, and it's kind of a shame that it's not in the main game, the main 30 FPS gameplay, especially since it does just seem to be the car body itself, but maybe there's other reasons there why they're not doing it right now, whether it be performance or getting it ready for launch. But that's what it is right now, not there in the 60 FPS mode. Helps the material quality in the 30 FPS mode for sure, and we'll look and see what it's like at launch. Yeah.
Quick word on the reflections in-game. I guess the most obvious example would be the hood view, if you like.
Yes.
Where it does seem to be, you get these sort of pristine mirror-like reflections, but this isn't ray tracing. It's just basically what they've been doing in Forza games for a long, long time, right?
They use two types of reflections. Obviously, for the main body reflection, like Alex said, they use the generated cube maps, which, by the way, look really good, I think.
Yeah.
The quality is high enough where you've actually had some people confusing it for ray tracing, but the lack of inner reflections can reveal that it's not. But the actual bonnet cam uses its own reflection method, and I think this has been in there since one of the older Forza games. Maybe going all the way back to Forza Motorsport 5. It actually reflects the entirety of the screen, so that even things like floating name tags tend to wind up encapsulated in the reflection. But it does provide a really nice mirror-like quality that's convincing, I think. And there's not really much in the way of, like, I guess you could say, car components that would require inter-reflections, so you don't really notice the limitations there in hood cam. So it's kind of like an adequate system, I think.
Yeah, you're getting that kind of mirror-like reflection that's perhaps too pristine for the material.
Yeah, that's something you'll notice too in this footage here. So, like, flipping back and forth on this car again, it has these struts on the outside edge that are like a dulled metal. They don't have ray trace reflections on them because they're like, I'm pretty sure the reason why they would do that is because really dull reflections are really expensive usually. Yeah, so they like cut them off. So it seems like even in the ray tracing mode that they have in this 30 FPS garage here, it has its own limitations as well too. So like technically there could be ways they could scale this up, but we'll have to see if the PC version does anything. We'll have to see what happens in time with this game.
Yeah, PC scalability I think is going to be fascinating just generally, because when you see what they're doing on Series X and how everything is just so pristine, where do you go from there is the question. I mean, it's already at 4K. And yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see where they go there. I just want to sort of move on quickly to performance. And this is kind of, well, how can I say it? In theory, it's a non-event, right? Because your 30 FPS mode, whether you're playing on Series X or Series S, runs locked at 30 frames per second with totally consistent frame pacing the way it should be, right? 60 frames per second, absolutely locked. And doesn't seem to matter what happens, the frame rate doesn't buckle. Now, in theory, when we talk about this, we kind of describe it as a non-issue. But if we think, I mean, I've visited Turn 10 Studios, and I know the amount of effort that goes into making that line, as boring as it is for us to show. It's basically an entire effort from every part of the studio, starting with the art team. Everything has to stay in budget. Then they have to factor in all of those different scenarios, the weather, how many cars might be on screen. So yeah, I think suffice to say that nobody is going to have any problems with performance based on what we've seen so far. And I'm just curious to learn more about how this was actually achieved, because I think looking back, there were some performance dips in older Horizon games. I think maybe Forza Horizon 2 and 3. I don't remember much happening in 4, but they clearly have cracked this now.
I think 4 was pretty much perfect by and large. I can't remember though if the 1X version had some dips in performance mode.
Right. Okay.
But
yeah.
I feel like mostly not. But I do remember Forza Horizon 3. I think it was possible.
Yeah, definitely in 2. I remember that on Xbox One. Okay, so look, this has already been something of an extended video, so let's wrap this one up, and I guess all I have to say is that I just can't wait to see final code. And it's not so long we've got to wait on this, and obviously we're going to do everything we can to get the best quality content based on the final code out there. But in the meantime, thanks for joining me on this one, and if you enjoyed this content, please do like, subscribe, /share, ring the bell for those notionally instant notifications, and of course DF supporter program. See this video the way it was meant to be seen via our download system. Join our Discord, join our community, get involved, it's pretty awesome. And that's all from us for now. Thanks for watching.